Has Russia already given up on mobilization? It seems so, but now the finger pointing begins. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is October 29th, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. And real quick, guys, before we get too far into it, do me a favor, hit subscribe. I have this goal to actually be one of the largest veteran content creators out there. So, man, if you guys can tap that button, it would be a huge help. Okay, so let's take a look at, when we look at the map, we can actually see the map hasn't even been updated in about a day and a half. So probably not any major changes to the front lines, which is news in and of itself. And especially when we're talking about Bakhmut. The reason is because according to Russian TV and a lot of the Russian Telegram groups, they're trying to spin the narrative that actually Russian forces are crushing it in this Bakhmut area. But the reality is not quite like that. In fact, even Prigozhin himself has admitted that his Wagner forces are advancing only 100 to 200 meters a day, which he claims was a normal rate for modern advances. That's a normal rate for a World War I advance when literally people were still using horses to draw in supplies. As you guys can see on the map, this Ukrainian advance seems to have seized, I don't know, like 3,000 square kilometers, not exactly measuring this in the hundreds of meters. So a really strange and bizarre claim, and a strange effort to spin his forces as actually being the only combat effective force on the battlefield. What's also interesting to me is that even though the Russian Ministry of Defense has, well, taken a lot of L's lately, it seems like Putin has his back. In fact, the two jointly held a press conference where they declared the end of Russia's military mobilization effort. These were super unpopular. So Shoigu and Putin together declaring an end is seemingly trying to associate these two figures with the mobilization's conclusion. They said they're only going to recruit volunteers and contract soldiers moving forward. They claim that Russia mobilized all 300,000 men, 82,000 of whom are deployed in Ukraine, and 200,000 are still at training. These numbers seem extremely ridiculously high. He also claims that only half of those troops are serving in combat units. I'm skeptical on all that. If there's one thing we know from even the U.S. war effort, it's that the definition of combat unit stretches until it means whatever you want it to. Officially, I was in a non-combat unit, and boy, did the Taliban not get that memo. In fact, there are probably, I would say, a majority. There were so many non-combat units that were engaged in combat operations that the U.S. Army had to invent a new type of combat distinction award called the Combat Action Badge, just to acknowledge that, yes, in fact, you can be a transport soldier or an artilleryman or in my case, military police, and you could still tear it up with the enemy, and we need to acknowledge that. So, again, I'm skeptical when Putin comes in and claims that 42,000 of these people are like filling out paperwork in the rear. Doesn't seem likely. But what's more interesting is that, of course, you have the problems starting to surround Putin and keeping control of what are called the Siloviki. The Siloviki are all the people who command independent fighting forces in this Ukraine conflict and are within Putin's inner circle. But so this can include, of course, Wagner Group head Prigozhin, notably Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, who also commands an independent Chechen detachment or purports to command it. But what's interesting is that Putin, these other commanders have been increasingly vocal in their criticism of the Russian Ministry of Defense. And Putin is doubling down, showing his support for the MOD by staging, of course, these public meetings. He also tasked Shoigu to have publicized calls with the Turkish, Chinese, and Western counterparts. This is, of course, giving him increasing credibility at a time when he is under attack by Prigozhin and Kadyrov. One day I'll pronounce his name correctly. But, of course, these other leaders have been not only very critical of Russian Ministry of Defense, but have been increasingly diplomatic towards each other. Kadyrov, of course, was deeply critical of the Russian commander Laplin, who he felt abandoned his own units and failed to fortify the line of contact correctly, but sung high praise for Prigozhin and his Wagner units, even calling Prigozhin a born warrior, which is high praise from Kadyrov. But when we look at sort of all the realities on the battlefield, we see that this is actually just a lot of finger pointing. A lot of these guys are trying to grow their brand with the ultra-nationalist Russian community by being outspoken and in many cases going direct to their supporters. Kadyrov has been utilizing this playbook for years, not just with his strong association with his military units, but also actually through mixed martial arts. It sounds crazy, but the type of person that is going to be an ultra nationalist and put a lot of value on martial strength is, of course, going to also appreciate a leader who they feel embodies the values in combat sports, namely mixed martial arts. And when we look at the images, we can see that Kadyrov has met just about anybody. Here he is with the UFC at the champion at the time, Fabricio Verdum. Here he is with Khabib. Looks like at a UFC event. Here he is with Mike Tyson. Here he is with one of the UFC's darlings. Oh my gosh. It's not Islam. It's I just watched him fight. You guys know who I'm talking about. Absolutely beat up Kevin Holland. But you can see Kadyrov is not joking around. Khamzat Chimaev. There you go. Yeah, Kadyrov and Khamzat are very, 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 very close. And he's definitely relying Kadyrov on, you can see here, this is no joke. Kadyrov definitely wants to draw this singular connection between warrior mentality, warrior spirit, his leadership, and the Chechen people. And this isn't an accident, right? And so Prigozhin is starting to take a page out of his playbook and also go direct to Russian mill bloggers on Telegram. He's started to basically operate as an influencer, which is sort of insane in its own right. But if you want a power base, the only way to cultivate it is through connecting to people, whether that's through your organization or, in the case of, again, Telegram and social media, directly through their phones. So this is a fascinating sort of turn of events as all of these forces are trying to build their own power bases, point the finger at other individuals in the Russian inner circle for all of the failures, and claim that they are actually successful despite the obvious evidence to the contrary. Anyway, guys, that is, of course, all I had for you for today. Things just get weirder and weirder in the Kremlin inner circle, and more of these conflicts are spilling out into the public, and it's not clear what that's going to mean for the war. But generally, it's a sign that things are not going great, because when there's successes, there's plenty of credit to go around. Anyway, guys, of course, if you want access to the uncensored combat videos, the kind that I can't show you here on YouTube because they are cracking down pretty hard on anything combat related, you want to become a member of the Patreon. Thanks to my lieutenant, to your patrons. And if you can't support that, then of course you can always check out my link to Ground News, ground.news, fighting media bias and supporting transparency in news sources. They really are great. The link for them is in the description. See you next time.